There were no one else named Farhan Ahmed joining the FDNY at that time. I was met with resistance. People questioned me that, are you a terrorist? Are you an infiltrator? I'm going to let my character speak for myself. Looking over Lower Manhattan, and I'll never forget it. It's burned into my memory. A clear, beautiful sky and Lower Manhattan in a fog. And I see the off-duty firefighters driving into Lower Manhattan to go help. And I was just like, I'm going the wrong way. I need to go with them. I need to go in that direction. And that was the day I knew I had already made my decision to be a firefighter before that. And that was like, this is where the journey begins. I will never forget the cries of the mother who lost her child at the hands of violence. And I was like, I need to do something about it. And then I joined the police department after that. I had friends of mine that were working in the Gap at that time. They were working in retail.
Sure.
And here I was, a 17-year-old with a man's life in my hands. That was the day I grew up.
In moments of crisis, how do you stay calm?
Yeah, we have a saying that if you're not laughing, you're crying. So we have developed, all first responders, people who work in medicine, nurses. I feel we have a sense of humor.
You're running for the New York State Assembly. Big deal. Congratulations on that, first
Thank
of all.
Thank you so much.
So how did you make up your mind to do that?
The 911 doesn't have the tools to do that, but
Sure.
It's only done through legislation and funding.
Farhan, welcome to the Rising Immigrant Show.
Hi, Jasmine. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So Farhan, let's start from the very beginning. Tell me your story. Where were you born? What was childhood like?
Well, I was born in Elmhurst, Queens. My parents immigrated here from Pakistan in 1979. We grew up in a one-bedroom apartment, 6 of us.
Wow.
And it was an amazing childhood. We had a great childhood. We came to this country because my uncle opened the first Indian Pakistani restaurant in New York City. It was called Shaheen Sweets. So my uncle immigrated here, and he sold mithai during a time where an immigration wave from India, Pakistan was coming to the U.S. and to New York. And a lot of people felt homesick, and they wanted a taste of home.
Yeah.
And, he was there at the right place. He was making mithai in his house, selling it out of the trunk of his car. And eventually, he branched out and opened a restaurant. And that restaurant was not just a restaurant. It was a community center. It was a place where other immigrants arriving from India, Pakistan would come to my uncle, and they would ask him for help for either finding an apartment or helping them out with some kind of paperwork. And he helped so many people, not just gave them jobs, but helped them assimilate and feel at home. And I just really, really admired him from that. And I also worked there. As we were children, we were kids, but we loved going to the restaurant and working and packing things. And we were like in the back of the kitchen and cleaning and doing delivery. Like, it just instilled such a work ethic in me. And that is kind of where my story started. I spent a lot of my time there.
And when you think about your childhood, how do you feel? Like, did you think that your parents were struggling, or, you felt comfortable in your home? Like, how did you feel growing up?
Well, growing up, I was very fortunate to have 2 incredible parents. They instilled wonderful values in us. They taught us all the right things to do. It was not easy. My mother stayed at home and she took care of us. My father worked. He eventually started driving a yellow cab. And you felt the struggles of when you would go to school and not have the coolest clothes or not have the nicest sneakers and not have things that the other kids had. And that's when I would feel it most. Playing outside in the streets was great. Growing up with Elmhurst, Queens was great because it was such a diverse community. I had friends from all over the world. And I think that really, really helped shape who I became. And I didn't realize, of course, until later. But I did, it wasn't easy because my father was the only one working. And my mother, she did everything that she could to learn the language. Even though English was a second language, speaking to our teachers, helping us with homework, whatever she could do, she tried her best. And also raised 4 of us, and 3 brothers and 1 sister. And I'm telling you, all 3 of my brothers, including myself, were a handful.
I'm sure.
We were a pain. We were a pain in the butt.
I have 2 boys, and I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they were. We did not make it easy. But we were very fortunate to have my 2 parents who raised us with good values, and where my father came from. So there was a story I want to share.
Sure, go ahead.
This shook me to my core. was one day, of course, growing up, my mom's cooking whatever she could cook, whatever we have on hand, and it's like, dal, rice, maybe, something simple. And we're crying, oh, we want McDonald's, we want pizza. And I think one day she got so fed up and she was just so frustrated with our complaining. She said, sit down. I want to tell you a story. And she said, do you understand where your father comes from? And we were just like, wow, no, Mom, what are you talking about? She told us a story. My father grew up, he didn't have food to eat some nights. And he said, my grandmother, what she would do was put on a pot on the stove with rocks in it and boil rocks. So my father would think that there was something cooking. And then he would fall asleep hungry. So I remember hearing this as a kid, this story, but my God, it was just, it hit me like a lightning bolt.
Shocks you, yeah.
And from that day on, I was like, I will never complain again, Mom. I'm so sorry, but I'm so grateful she told me that story about my father. I am so grateful I learned where I come from.
Right.
And that...
It humbles you.
It humbled me forever. And, if I ever feel myself straying away, I think of that story and it brings me right back. And it made me so grateful for everything that I've received.
So you talked a little bit about your grandmother. I know she migrated from India to Pakistan. Did you hear any stories growing up from your family?
Jasmine, it's so unfortunate how we are not taught anything about partition here in this country in the schools, right? I'm actually embarrassed to admit that I didn't even understand partition until after my grandmother was gone. And she was such a strong, stoic woman. I learned of her story afterwards, and I learned that she had, she made a treacherous journey from Amritsar. She grew up, she was born in Amritsar, Punjab, and she and her family obviously had to, move to Pakistan, and they went to Sargodha in Punjab, Pakistan. And I learned that along the way she lost her sister. Her sister didn't pass away, but they just lost touch for, I believe, a few months. And eventually they were able to reunite, but I just couldn't believe my grandmother never told me this story. She was just a simple grandmother, always laughing and quiet. She was a kind of woman. This is how tough she was. I like really admire her for this toughness. Is like, once she like fell and broke her arm, but she never complained to anyone. She never said, my arm is hurting, because she was just that kind of person. Just so strong that she didn't want to bother anyone. She didn't want to cause any kind of discomfort to others.
Yeah, grandparents were so much more resilient than we are.
Oh my God,
today.
yeah. She was so tough.
I look at my nanny, my grandmother's still alive, and I look at her and, she's struggling with a lot of health issues, but she's always still so positive. She tries to pitch in with housework. She tries to pitch in with whatever we're up to. And it sort of fascinates me to the point, and I'm like, she's like 90 years old and she's still keeping up to date. She's still doing her chores. And I'm like, it's because of her internal resilience and what they have faced growing up, that everything is a breeze to them. They've had such a tough time during partition, settling in new places, building their life again, as any immigrant does, right? But the way they were sort of separated from their families was very traumatic. And how they rebuilt their lives, I think, because they've seen so much adversity, they're not scared of anything. And our generation misses that, although, we're lucky to have the privilege which second or third generation often enjoys, once the grandparents have made that, made a hard choice about moving to another country or, building a life again. But we miss that resilience.
We really do. And I think the best way to do that is before it gets lost, I could give anyone any advice. If you have your grandparents, ask them their story. I so wish I would have had, I asked her when she was still here, and I had to learn her story from my mother and other family members. But please talk to your grandparents. Ask them their stories of resilience. You will be resilient from that. And and like you said, it is lost because we're in a different life here.
Right.
And I think that's something that I recommend people do.
So you were 17 when you started working. You started working as an EMT. Talk to me a little bit about that. How did that happen? How did you think of public service in the first place?
So I was in college studying documentary filmmaking. And I was at Hunter College here in New York City. And, I wanted to tell stories about people who couldn't tell stories about themselves. And that was kind of my, why I chose to study that. But it was also, I realized being an artist is going to be tough. I was in an apartment growing up, in a 1-bedroom apartment, all my family, and I realized I needed to also have work and I needed to do something. But I was trying to figure out who I was, like what could I do? And, you know, I knew that I wanted to help people.
Right.
So there were two things. I wanted to be either an athlete or help people, right? And I was like, what is the perfect job that helps people, but you're also kind of a team? And I thought, wait a second, firefighter. That is it. And that was before 9/11. And I was like, that is perfect. You're helping people and you have a team culture. And then 9/11 happens. And I'm walking home, crossing Queensboro Bridge, and I'm looking over Lower Manhattan, and I'll never forget it. It's burned into my memory. A clear, beautiful sky and Lower Manhattan in a fog. And I see the off-duty firefighters driving into Lower Manhattan with their gear to go help. And I was just like, I'm going the wrong way. I need to go with them. I need to go in that direction. And that was the day I knew I had already made my decision to be a firefighter before that. And that was like, this is where the journey begins. And now I started the process. I joined the FDNY. I first had to start as an EMT because to get to firefighter is not easy. It's a process. And I went through the fire cadet program and I became an EMT at 17 years of age. And here I was working in the South Bronx in a very busy neighborhood where there was a lot of violence. And I remember one of my first calls I had where I was someone that was stabbed all over their body. And I remember being in the back of the ambulance with them, so afraid, not knowing what I'm doing as a brand new EMT. And here was this person looking at me. And I could just see the white of his eyes so big and looking at me and almost in desperation of help me or save me. And I remember just feeling also his blood just trickling down the stretcher onto my shoes. And I had friends of mine that were working in the Gap at that time. You know, they were working in retail. Sure. And here I was, a 17-year-old with a man's life in my hands. That was the day I grew up. You know, that job showed me in that one instant how different we are in different socioeconomic barriers. I saw it just showed me a lot. It showed me a lot about what...
As a 17-year-old, it is a lot to see death in your face and to see someone struggling so bad. Yeah. I can't even imagine how you would have felt as a fresh, young teenager starting your work with FDNY. Talk to me about how some of these experiences shaped you into the human you are now.
You know, it shaped me because I started seeing all these problems and I wanted to be a superhero. I wanted to, so if I could continue on, as I worked as an EMT in the South Bronx, I saw a lot of young children, teenagers, die at the hands of violence. And I was like, this is wrong. Like, what is going on? Why is this happening? Why are there so many young, I will never forget, you see a lot of terrible things. You see a lot of, blood and injuries. But one of the most haunting things from that experience was the cries of a mother who lost her child in the hospital. Like, that is something that just I will never forget. I've seen people hurt and injured, but I forgot some of those. But I will never forget the cries of the mother who lost her child at the hands of violence. And I was like, I need to do something about it. I want to be like Batman. And then I joined the police department after that because I was like, I am going to get these guns off the street. And that it just instilled into me that I have to do something. I wanted to do something. I wanted to solve the problem on my own. And that carried me over into the police department from there.
So you started working as a New York City Police Department officer. What is it like policing such a big and diverse city?
It was incredible. It was, it was also eye-opening in many ways. But I worked in Queens, in South Queens, and I actually worked in a it was one of the largest Sikh communities in New York City, in Richmond Hill, Ozone Park area. And I saw what I loved about that job was I just loved being there for people. My favorite, something I took away from that job that I loved was just being on the street, standing where I needed to be, and having the old people walk by and say, "Thank you, officer, for being here." And I felt like I was doing my job. I felt like I was keeping people safe. And that was, I think, one of the most enjoyable parts of that job was talking to people, walking up and down the street, going into every store and building relationships with them, because I feel like right now there is, that is, that doesn't exist as much. The relationship between police and community is very fragile these days. And I think it all comes back to something simple as just being human and connecting with the people that you're serving.
You're here to protect them anyway. Yeah.
And
So, when you worked as a police officer in Queens, what are some of the issues that you encountered?
Well, I encountered some of the issues that I encountered was, it was obviously
could be anything related to the community in specific. You said you served the Sikh community. Are there any issues that we might not know, which are not in the public eye, but which were quite prevalent when you were serving?
Yes, actually. So being a large Sikh community, there was a lot of hate crime towards Sikhs, and there were people that were attacked for being Sikh because they wore turbans, people would either attack them for because they thought they were Muslim, I remember being part of that precinct. It really showed me how the Sikh community was targeted because of who they were and how they looked. And it made me incredibly sad. But I did love how the community was so strong, and they came together. And they would come to the precinct as a group, and they would gather together as a community and come and show, that they're united.
Support each other through the process.
Supporting each other. And that made me so proud of working for this community. And that's something that I really saw that I walked away with. And I was so proud also. It made me so proud of my, my family being from Punjab. And I was just I felt really proud that I could communicate with them and I could relate with them as some sort culturally. And I just really appreciate that part. I wasn't there that long in the police department also. I was there for about 2 years before I moved on to the fire department. And but I think that was something that I really took away, was how strong and resilient the Sikh community was in that community. And it made me just really proud to see that, because they were there were hate crimes against them for who they were. And I just just really hurt me that happened.
So you worked as a police officer and firefighter after the 9/11 happened. You have a Muslim name. You come from that background. Did you encounter bias from the people you served?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting part of this story. So yes, I joined the FDNY. So as I first was an EMT, I started that in January of 2002, only a few months after 9/11. My name stood out like a sore thumb. Right? There were no one else named Farhan Ahmed joining the FDNY at that time. And it was, I was met with resistance. People questioned me. People, they said things to me. I remember I had an instructor who said once to me, he said, "I hate you." And I was like, wow, I never heard that before. I'm here for the same purpose, here for, the best interest of giving myself for the city. But at that time, people were angry, and it was just the way it was. But you know what? I did not let that hold me down. When I got to the fire department, they suffered so much loss on 9/11, so you could understand. My name was still, there were not many people, or there weren't any, maybe one or two other people that had Muslim names, and I was met with a lot of resistance there. I was met with people that questioned me. They said, "Are you a terrorist? Are you an infiltrator?" They questioned my intentions for being there. And, I didn't let that discourage me. I kept my head down and I worked hard. I was like, I know who I am. I'm going to let my character speak for myself. And the best part is when they start asking you questions about your culture and your religion and hey, is this true? Now, when you have people ask you questions about yourself, now you could change the narrative. Now you could have a dialogue. And I think that is what we need to do, is we do need to have a conversation. And I also want to be clear on something. Yes, in the beginning I had resistance, and it wasn't from people in my firehouse, it was other people. I just want to make that clear also, because the gentleman that I worked with took such great care of me. And once they got to know me better, they couldn't have been any more supportive and loving of our culture. And, they took wonderful care of me, and they were sensitive to the things that were important to me. So I do want to make that clear that yes, there was bumps in the beginning because of my name, and people did question my intentions. They did think I was a terrorist or an infiltrator, but I had a wonderful career after that because I let my character speak for who I was.
Right.
And conversations is what it takes to do that.
Sometimes, as humans, we have this tendency to judge people just based on their names or how they look, because we feel threatened as humans. We feel like we're scared of the unknown.
Yeah.
So once we get to know people, it usually helps you see them as a human and, see their perspective, where they're coming from, their culture.
Exactly.
And it's unfortunate that because of some people, sometimes the entire community has to face the burn of it, but that's how it has always been. But, what needs to be emphasized is that there always needs to be an open-mindedness to answering questions, to, getting to know people, to giving them an opportunity to know you. And I feel like that really opens people up and helps you sort of, establish a bond with them. Anywhere we go, any place, even if we go to someone's house as a guest, there's this wall between you and the host, right? If you don't know them very well, if you're a stranger in the house. Once they know you, you know them. It's this comfort that sets in. So I feel like as immigrants, we always face that in different shapes and forms.
Yes.
But to give an opportunity to others and also allowing yourself to know others well. I think that really helps.
Yeah, I think some of the best relationships came out of people that I thought probably wasn't going to happen. People that, this person thinks this of me, which actually it was the exact opposite. They actually turned out to be the best relationship because that wall that you just spoke of, once you take that wall down, it changes everything.
Right.
Talk to each other, have conversations, have uncomfortable conversations. And there's so much progress and growth in that. I really believe in that. So easy for me, not easy, but it really helped my journey forward.
Is there anybody who you came across who didn't want it to be served by you just because of your name?
You know what? I could say safely that I never had that happen. I think when people are in need of help, I think that's the other thing. When people need help, they don't care who you are. When they're having an emergency, they don't care what your name is. They don't care what color your skin is. They're just so grateful to get the help they need.
Right.
So I never actually had an interaction like that. I've had people comment on my name. Oh, wow, that's an interesting name. I've never seen that before. Where are you from? But I never actually had someone that I was serving that, said something to me about that.
So you talked about, helping people who were affected by violence or drugs on the street. In moments of crisis, how do you stay calm?
Well, in moments of crisis, we have a saying that if you're not laughing, you're crying. So we have developed, all first responders, people who work in medicine, nurses. I feel we have a sense of humor, and we laugh. We like to laugh a lot. We joke around with each other a lot. And if you're not laughing, you're crying. And I really do believe that. So we do develop a certain sense of humor with each other to keep our spirits uplifted.
Right.
Because, you do see a lot. And now that I've stepped away from that world, I started reflecting a lot on the calls and emergencies that I went on. And it's pretty heavy. And there's some memories that just flood back that I totally forgot about. But
because in the moment, you're probably acting on what's required, you're not thinking. It's when you sit down and you start to reflect, probably it comes back. Comes back to you. So sometimes, actually most of the times, police officers and firefighters have to respond in minutes, like seconds. So are you trained to respond that effectively and that quickly?
Yes, and that's probably of all three jobs that I've had in emergency service. Of course, your response is everything. It's confidence. It's a confidence that you develop. Like when you're new, yes, you're scared. You're afraid. I remember when I started off as an EMT and I drove for the first time. And I remember getting my first call. It comes up on the screen and it gives you an address. And I was like, oh my God, do I even know how to get there? You know, like, and this is real.
Right.
And luckily you have your partners to support you. Like, all right, you go here and make a left. But man, once you understand what you're doing, you do develop such a confidence that when you know where to go and what you have to do, that is such an incredible feeling, especially for a first responder, whether you're EMT, police officer, or firefighter.
Right.
It is that level of confidence, like when you know what you got to do, where you're going, that's your job. That's what you have to do. You know, you are thinking about the people that you're coming to save.
Right. Any fun stories from New York City?
Oh my God,
I know we're a crazy city. I know there's so many interesting things. You know, last night I was in a subway and I see a guy dressed as an Irish saint, and he's like dancing, he's selling jokes, and I'm like, where on earth would you see it? You know, you only see certain things in New York City. Any incidents or any fun encounters?
I mean, there were so many funny things that some probably I can't share on this podcast with you. I understand it's probably, young audience. We've had some funny calls where people getting stuck is a very interesting one. I think that's like, somebody. So you've had like teenagers that sneak into a park and it's a children's park. And they jump on like the children's swing.
Oh, and
but they get stuck. So now here's like a grown.
So how do you not laugh when you get there?
Well, we are laughing. So the funny thing is like, when you get somebody that's stuck in like a child swing and they're like an almost grown adult and they're stuck and they're laughing and their friends are laughing at them. And now you have to put we carry dishwashing liquid with them. Yeah. So now we have to squirt them with all this dishwashing liquid, and we're like, all right, now, and put water on them and ask them, all right, now rub it into yourself. So now here they are in a foamy mess, and their friends are laughing at them. And it's kind of, it's funny. It's fun because everyone's okay. It's not like a dire emergency where somebody's really hurt, and you just kind of laugh it off with each other, So it's like those kind of little calls that you always remember that, you just had a good laugh and then you just walk away because no one gets hurt. Yeah.
I can't imagine in today's world if that was to happen, it'll go on social media the next day.
Oh, yeah.
No, not even the next day, the very moment.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine the plight of that teenager.
All the kids have phones now, too. So it's like they're recording everything, and yes, you will be made fun of. Yeah. Yeah.
That was funny. So I wanted to take a minute and talk about what you're currently up to. You're running for the New York State Assembly. Big deal. Congratulations on that, first of all.
Thank you so much.
So how did you make up your mind to do that?
Well, it all comes from what I did for the last 23 years. I was a public servant, as we spoke about. And what I started seeing at the end of my career was 911 was being asked to be tasked. 911 calls are becoming more about cries for services than actual emergencies. Yes, we respond to emergencies, but a lot of our calls started being repeated calls for the same issue, mental health crisis in New York. So you have a police car, an ambulance, and a fire truck showing up for the same person, maybe once, twice, 3 times a week for the same person. And it kind of just started opening our eyes at how the system is broken. This person gets either handcuffed or taken to a hospital, then they're released and they're back on the street, and it just happens again and again. They're not getting the treatment that they need. And
so it's a cycle.
It's a cycle, and it's frustrating, especially as first responders, because, we don't like to not solve the problem.
Sure.
Like, the fire truck, the best example is it's like a problem solver on wheels. We solve anything and everything, but when we couldn't solve the problem, it's very frustrating for us. And it was frustrating for me. And it was like, what do we need to do? And this is, the 911 doesn't have the tools to do that, but it's only done through legislation and funding. And the opportunity came up. I mean, I realized toward the end of my career, I was like, you know what, if I got an opportunity to run for office, I want to try to bring these problems to Albany or to bring it to the attention of lawmakers and policymakers so we can change it and we could fix these systems that are in place because they could be better.
So you're representing District 66. Why do you think mental health and substance abuse is such a big deal in the community?
Well, it's, I guess I'm running in District 66, and I feel like it's an issue everywhere, to be honest, all throughout New York City. It's not just District 66, But it is an area where we've had incidents where, there's subway stations and there's, mental health issues in the subway stations. There's people with substance abuse that need treatment. And again, it's highlighting what I've seen on the streets, how those people are just not getting the help they need. They're being cycled in and out of hospitals. They don't need hospitals. They don't need the ER. They don't need 911 to come and take them to the ER so they could come back out again. They need facilities for treatment that follows through, whether it's mental health services, whether it's substance abuse services. And we need to focus and put money on, because that's also safety. It's safety for themselves. Right. It's safety for the community.
For the community,
and that's something that I'm really running on, is safety. Because when we are not safe, nothing happens. Businesses don't run. Children won't go to the park. They're afraid to go to school. And it's such a domino effect. And that's why I'm really focused on these issues, because I think it'll just improve. It'll not only help those that need the help, it'll help the people that are in that community as well.
Makes sense. Absolutely. And so you talked about safety. I know you're big on affordability. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, affordability Manhattan is expensive. It's really expensive to live here. I worked as a first responder, as a firefighter, and, it's hard to get by. It's hard to get by on the salary. I'm grateful for it. I have a job. We get health benefits, but it still wasn't enough. People are still struggling to even buy a home. Even, and that affects so many things. And people, affects their decision making. Will I have a family? Will I grow my family? Can I even have a child? I can't afford a child. And it shouldn't be like that. People should be able to do what they want to do. They should raise the families that they want to raise. And I think what is lacking is affordable housing. And I feel like we need to build it. And I believe in the Mitchell-Lama program, which I think has been which would be very helpful for people such as nurses, teachers, firefighters, and give them a place to live amongst not just luxury high-rises.
Right.
And it should be a balance of everything. It should be a balance for everyone. And I think affordable housing needs to be built. We could talk about it, but it needs to be built. And that is, that is something that it needs to be addressed.
On a lighter note, how did you meet your partner Angela, and do you guys talk politics at home?
Yeah, we actually, Angela, she's the love of my life. She's been incredible in supporting me. So we actually met on a dating app. We met on a dating app, and it was just by chance. And we connected actually a lot on I remember our first date, we talked a lot about politics. We talked about our culture. We were really connected on, but we talked a lot about politics. And we talked a lot about world issues and what was going on in the world and how we feel about it. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about her. And I love our relationship, how we, can go off of each other and just have these deep conversations. And she's been incredibly supportive. Like, she's one of my biggest, she's out there helping me get signatures. She's helping me, put together a fundraiser. She's been incredibly, I'm not here without her. So that's what I can say.
And you both come from very different worlds. You come from the world of public service. She comes from the world of entrepreneurship and entertainment. How do your worlds collide?
Well, I think opposites attract, right? And you can't get any more opposite than that. She's from one spectrum, I'm from the other. And I think, I make a joke with her before I go into that, is I tell her, we're both firefighters, because she puts out fires in the entertainment world and I put out fires in the real world. So she does her part, I do mine. But I think the contrast of our lives makes it more interesting, right? It makes us bring, I could tell her stories of things that she would never see. Right. And she tells me stories that I would never see in the world of as an entrepreneur or in entertainment. I learn so much. We learn from each other. And that's why I think it's so great that things work, is we learn from each other, because we come from such different worlds.
No, it's beautiful. So my husband is in the finance world. And as you see, I'm in the entertainment and was in the food industry earlier. And when we first started dating, and I'm like, what are we going to talk about? It's like, I didn't know what he did. I had no idea what an algorithmic trader means in the first place. And I'm like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
Because when you come from different worlds, there's a new perspective you bring to the table, and there's everything, every day is new.
Yeah.
Because whenever we sit down, he learns about my work, the people I talk to, I learn about his work, and it keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
Although I know a lot of, doctors prefer to marry doctors, and like engineers prefer to marry engineers because there's commonality in routines or structure or their work. But I always feel like, difference is something that keeps things exciting.
Absolutely. And, perspective is, different perspectives, it'll make you think, because you don't think one way, you think in two different ways now because of your partner. And I just think it just kind of opens your mind up a little more to the world.
Right. So if I talk about one thing that you've carried with you from your father, who was a Pakistani cab driver in New York City, what would that be?
Of course, I spoke about my grandmother's toughness, but my father's dedication to his family, his resilience and dedication, even coming from the upbringing that he had. My father always tells us this one thing, and it keeps me grounded. And he always says, like, I had no business being in this country. He said, where I came from, I would never believe that I was going to be here in New York City, having a home, roof over my head, here in New York. And he made, like, he would say that with such a, so much passion that he can't believe it himself. So seeing that in him made me realize, all right, I'm so fortunate for what we have, what we've attained. Yeah, I'm not, I'm not the richest person in the world, but I have my family. I have a roof over my head. It just made me appreciate everything I have. It humbled me. So his humble quality, his hard work ethic, and his absolute dedication to his family are the values that I take from him that I want, and I hope I could, match.
And if there's one thing you would want to say to a young, budding, aspiring public servant, what would that be?
Public service is a calling. It's not something that you should just try. I feel like it's something that should be within you, that you have an urge and a need to give, because then you will be a great public servant. If you want to try something, or you want to, maybe, I just recommend that it should be a part of you, who you are. It shouldn't be just something that you want to give a shot. Because I think you'll be doing a disservice not to yourself and others. So if it's something within you, it's a calling. And if you have that calling, answer it.
We're going through some tough times politically, given the international politics and what we're seeing in the news. How do you stay grounded? Do you have any thoughts and feelings about it?
Yeah, the world is a really interesting place right now, right? There's war. There's, the whole, the stigma against immigrants, Islamophobia against, South Asia. There's so much going on. And how do you stay grounded is kind of the lesson that I took in my experience, was to continue being good to each other, and take care of each other, and talk to your neighbors. Talk to people who are different from you. Talk to those you may disagree with, just to have a conversation. So you may you may be able to create a dialogue with each other where you can meet and develop, respect for each other. And how do I stay grounded? Of course, it's terrible that there's continuous wars and fighting and bloodshed. And yes, we're all tired of it. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of seeing that. We have so many issues that we have to focus on here at home that are being, that we have so much to fix at home as well. And I think getting involved in different wars at the moment is, something we need to think about or talk about. But I just stay grounded by continuing doing what I can do here. My focus is right now currently within the community, within the district that I'm running in, the people who live there and their concerns here in New York City.
Very well. Thank you so much, Farhan. I had a wonderful time talking to you and getting to know you a little bit better.
Thank you for having me.
It was an absolute honor to sit here with you and have a conversation, dive into your life, know where you come from, know a little bit more about your family. And I'm so glad we were able to do this.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation as well.
Thank you.